enjoyable, but you know, like I say, I miss the banter. Eh?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We had in Whisky Week, we had 4 live nights.
Yeah.
2 up north and 2 down here.
Yeah.
Very popular. It was really good actually. We ran it like a speed dating night, so the guests didn't leave their table. We had 6 or 7 tables, and the presenter, the distiller, he got up after 10 or 15 minutes and moved to the next table.
Yeah.
So everybody loved it. It was really good. Hard work for the presenter. Because he had to introduce himself, start all over again. He's got 10 or 15 minutes, but the guests loved it. It's fantastic.
Because they've been getting quite a few hits, like the guys used to run the one at Double Bay. Yeah.
David Ligoff and
David. I think he got 10,000 hits or something.
Wow.
Something with that magnitude of because there were 3 presentations on the Saturday. Yeah.
Wow. Gee.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Yep. Ivan and David.
Yeah, they're not together.
No.
David's now got a sort of more events. Business. Why can't I hear him?
Yeah.
How about now?
That's better.
Yep.
So the first rule is that if anyone speaks when it's muted, you have to pay the other party $10. So I owe you $10 now. That's apparently a rule in the Zoom time. So I'll deliver that when you open up your borders. But g'day to everyone tuning in on the Zoom chat, on the social media, on Facebook at the Whisky Fair and Oakbrow websites, and welcome to night 3 of Sydney Whisky Forum, our virtual Whisky Fair replacement for 2020. We've had 2 nights of international guests so far, and we do thank everyone for, doing the hard yards and getting up at 10 a.m. to drink whiskey with us Australians, just as we were getting into the night. But tonight, we've got our first of our local panels or discussions coming up, which mirrors what we would have been doing normally on the Wednesday before Whisky Fair, which is Tim Duckett's Trails Through Tasmania. So tonight we have 2 very young bucks down in Tasmania, doing it very tough in COVID times, sitting in front of a fire, I see there, with some good whiskey, to talk a little bit of rubbish and have a bit of fun. But g'day, Tim and Bill.
Mate, how are you? Scotty, g'day, mate.
How's COVID treating you?
Mate, living the dream down here. I can go and sit in the Bond store by myself, play my music, a few dance steps, and there's nobody there to criticise me. So
that's because no one wants to go there when he's doing that.
That's all right. But having the time of my life, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Yeah. You're not missing us tourists yet?
We are.
Yeah, sure.
Just a little bit.
Okay, we are.
Yeah. You get your arm tied around your back to ask that one, don't you? Before we get into things, and we do have a little bit of a structure of what we want to talk about tonight, but I think this is the 4th or 5th year we've done Tim's Wednesday Fair Week night, and we always come up with a structure and always get out through the window pretty quickly. So before we get too far into anything, I do want to give a big shout out to, we did offer out some tasting packs for people who didn't have anything at home that they had open or, wanted to play along with some drinks we have. So a big thank you to Kathleen Davies and the team at Nipper Courage that whipped these up for us. You can tell that we outsourced it because it looks way too professional for anything that we could have done. So a big shout out to those guys with a bunch of whiskey. So if you do have one of those sets, as we talk about stuff tonight, we're going to go through from the lowest ABV to the highest ABV. So starting with the Lark Symphony into the TIB Old Kempton, the Vatted Malt, and then Heartwood, Don't Fuck It Up Son, and Witch's Cauldron. But if you don't have the tasting packs, and they were very limited, feel free to open anything you've got at home, preferably Australian, ideally Tasmanian. But yeah, we're just going to have a bit of drink and have a talk along. But boys, to start off with, everyone's great plans to be down there in Tasmania this year have sort of come to a screeching halt. Everyone who planned to be down at Tas Whisky Week did it from their lounge rooms instead. But things have still been happening. There's been new releases. What's like the whiskey industry been like down there? Obviously, cellar doors are a little bit quieter than normal, but things still tracking along?
Yes, very much so for us as running the two companies, TIB and Heartwood. The screeching halt came to us with the supply to bars and outlets in Victoria and New South Wales, and they were a large part of they were the large part of the purchases that we had, and but we've been very fortunate. We still have a lot of personal support, so we really we haven't suffered. How about Lark?
Yeah, look, most of the other small distilleries that I know of are selling through those that are selling through Dan Murphy's. They're certainly struggling to get a hold of Tasmanian whiskies at the moment. Their sales have been really good, which I guess is a good indication that people are still happy to support the Australian whisky industry. Distilleries like Kempton, whenever they have a club release, bang, they go every time, first night. So there's a lot of support there from people. Sadly, we just don't have them visiting the cellar door.
Sorry, just quickly, before we went live, we were hearing you loud and clear. You're a little bit soft at the moment there. Have you changed something? Yeah. So, I mean, I am going to open a whiskey before we get into too many things. So I'm going to crack open the brand new Lark Symphony, which is a blended malt. If I can find which one it is.
Just before we go too much further, I'd just like to say that, Scott, you've offended me.
Good. Well, that's. I was going to do it later.
You put the ability.
We'll do it, Scott.
I'm very sensitive, and you put on your Instagram advertisement, right? Instagram post that we were going to get from Bill Lark insight into the industry, right?
Yep.
And then you said you were just going to get ramblings from me.
Yep.
Look, you can see offence sketched all over my face, mate. What? Ramblings.
We're trying to control you, Tim.
Yeah, dear me.
So was there a factual inaccuracy in that statement?
No, we just didn't have to mention it. Hello, okay.
Most of these people have been to one of these tastings before. They know what they're getting. There's no fooling, mate. May as well be honest up front.
I know.
It's like going to his office on a Friday.
Next Friday.
Dangerous, yeah. All right.
Next Friday, we'll go to the office and just open stuff.
Yeah.
You guys are all invited.
We'll let Scotty introduce his whiskey.
Sorry, mate. You're away.
Yeah. No, just see. What did I say? Like we've lasted about 6 minutes and it's already gone downhill. I'm actually trying this for the first time. I resisted all temptation to actually give this a crack. So I'm going to try this brand new Lark Symphony blended malt when I think. But we're going to talk a little bit about the art of tasting and blending later on tonight, which I think we'll come into this quite quickly. But you guys have been, I know, what we were talking about before, we're throwing around a bit of a word that you're having a little bit of an argument about, the word master. And the word master does get used a lot in whiskey, and it's now appearing more and more in Australian whiskey. There's a lot more people involved in Australian whiskey than there was 5-10 years ago. But you might notice that the Oak Barrel hasn't run a masterclass, or it's run about 3 masterclasses in the last 2 or 3 years. We run tastings, and then when certain people come to town, then you run a masterclass. So, I mean, do you guys want to talk about what the word master means in whiskey?
It's something that a lot of people are talking about down here, because it seems that the moment anyone starts a distillery, whether it's here in Australia or in America, the first thing they want to do is call themselves a master distiller. And look, it doesn't really worry me necessarily, but some people find that a bit strange. How can you come into the industry and be a master distiller? And I think if you look at the wine industry, there are only 3 masters of wine in Australia, and yet every distiller in Australia is calling themselves a master distiller. So I started looking into it. What is a master distiller and what is a master class? And places like Scotland, they hold that term fairly high with a fair amount of reverence. But it really refers to somebody who is teaching somebody about their whiskies, or is teaching a new distiller about how to make their whiskey, or teaching a consumer how to drink their whiskey. And that term master can be applied to those people. So look, while some people might take offence at somebody new to the industry calling themselves a master distiller, and I know that's the case, really, if they're teaching you about their whiskey and teaching you about their distillery and helping you through, then in that sense they are a master distiller, and that's what a masterclass is.
The thing is, though, and we've discussed this, people are calling themselves a master and they've been 2 seconds in the industry.
Yeah.
And you get master blenders and you get master distillers and you get master whatever. And I do think it's overused personally, but I understand where Bill's coming from in the true definition of the word master, you to teach. I mean, if people have said that I've run a masterclass, one, I am not a master and I'm not even close. And 2, class means you're probably going to learn something, but you don't learn much from me.
You learn nothing from me.
No, you learn nothing from me because we're just there for a drink, you see. Yeah. But there are lots and lots of people that use that term, and it's overused in Australia particularly, I think.
Yeah, personally, I'd like to think it's a term that's applied to somebody after they've been in the industry a long time and have shown a certain amount of leading the way and education and knowledge and experience. I've never thought to call myself a master distiller, and I probably wouldn't. But I can understand. Yeah, well, Lynn's the master.
Yeah,
I can understand why people do use the term, because if you do research it, it's applied for that educational side of things.
Can I ask another question then? And a couple of quick shout outs to people watching on the Facebook. Peter Bignell, who's sipping on a Lark Symphony as well. And Backwoods Distilling Co., who we're going to have on tomorrow night. But like the term, and we're not talking about masters, but masterclass, and a good, you sort of, what Tim, you were saying there, you don't consider yourself a whiskey master, fine. But if we lined up, 10 of the best Heartwoods, would that not be a masterclass? I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate. It doesn't matter who was hosting it or who was in thing, but if that was the best 10 Heartwoods or the best representation, regardless of the knowledge, would that be a masterclass?
That would be a piss up.
Yes, well, that's what all Heartwood tastings are. But technically,
well, you take somebody that, let's say it's Highland Park 18, and the guy that he works at Highland Park. And his job is to make the 18-year-old Highland Park the same as the 18-year-old Highland Park from the previous year based on the casks that he has available. That's something that I can't do. That's something that I would consider as a master. He has grasped his craft, and he can produce consistent quality whiskies of similar character year on, year off. And, that's something that I would think would be termed a master. What I'd do is just make a good drink. It's as simple as that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Tim. And I think people have a lot of things they'd like to call you. But,
yeah.
And if someone wants to call you a master, I think that's fair in that situation.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. It's all right.
Whatever you guys have done to the audio as well, it's just sort of kicked back into gear. So well done on that. Keep up the good work. But Backwoods do come up with an interesting point of Godfather class. Is the Godfather? Where does that sit in the ratio of titles? The whiskey Godfather and the whiskey master. Is this a big alpha move? Are you actually saying you whiskey masters that's cute, but up here we're talking to Godfathers?
That's where Bill thinks he is. Just like that, he's up there.
That came about just by accident. I didn't call that.
Yeah, sure. To the point, I'm going to let everyone into a secret here. When Bill stands up and walks away from his chair, feeding into the Godfather, and he doesn't actually leave the room because he's still watching you. Hand commissioned painted portraits of himself, still watch you through the chair.
I didn't commission that. It was a gift.
It's very good, but it's very Godfather.
And it's quite slimming as well.
Yeah, I asked her to take 10 kilos.
Yeah, what was it that got you to? God knows how we get onto any topics in this game, but what was it that got you to talking about the word master? Have you seen it being overused a bit recently, more than usual?
Yeah, I think we have, and I think people are starting to question. Who is a master and who has the right to call themselves a master distiller or a master blender. And that's just a discussion that takes place when you've had too many whiskies at Tim's office.
But you can see the problem. You'll get a brand ambassador, let's say, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I probably will. And they've been in the game a short period of time. And they call it a masterclass, but their aim is to sell their product. And so I think if you're just, and I probably fall into the same category, but if you're just trying to flog one product, I think that limits you and limits the information that you transfer to the people, because there's lots and lots of other products out there that are equally as good. And I think that, you've got to explore all of the characteristics of whiskey to have to impart knowledge. And I think sometimes being just a single brand ambassador, you limit yourself, and I don't think it should be called a masterclass.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you, only because I've been researching it, and there's a big school of thought around the world that says as long as you are imparting knowledge about your whiskey to a group of people or to a consumer, then that is a masterclass. Okay. That's the consensus around the world.
Yeah,
not this little bit of
not in this room. No.
There's a few good comments coming through, and Regan Owens, I think that's just about to be asked what you define masterclass. So master seller, says Dan Mathers, and Peter Bignell says a master's person who's mastered his calling. But I think that actually taps onto another really interesting point, and perhaps a year like 2020 where everything's been disrupted is from a retail point of view. I regularly have people come and sell me bottles, and it often comes from a couple of angles. You'll have a brand ambassador who comes sells you the dream, but doesn't know what the cost is. And then you've got a sales rep that will come and sell it to you. Now, I actually think those roles are merging and will eventually become the same if they haven't. And we're talking about, the Scotch industry is trying to figure out ways to, after the past 2 decades of talking about regions and age as the only two things that matters, trying to re-engineer the way that we're talking. So I think we are in a phase of whiskey where we're learning how to talk and express whiskey in different ways. And I think that sort of taps onto what you're saying. The role of the brand ambassador, I think, is changing right before our eyes at the moment. And, does Tasmania have a brand ambassador? Someone who, apart from someone like yourself, Lark, Bill, who you'll say good things about all Tasmanian whiskey, but is that role exist?
No, it doesn't at this stage, but I can see a day when there will be somebody out there representing the Tasmanian brand. It's pretty important that we do that, and somebody that can we've always worked together as an industry down here. I think everybody knows that. We've always been fairly collegial, and we've always been happy that if we go to a show and other distillers, the mates can't go, we'll represent their whiskey for them. We sort of all act as a Tasmanian brand ambassador when the need arises.
That's exactly true, and that's how it has been in the past, because Bill abandons me and leaves me behind the counter every time and wanders off and just talks to everybody. So you've got to run his stall as well as your own. So it happens.
Thank you.
That's all right. But I do wonder, though, once we become or distilleries become larger, as they do in Scotland, and competition is more pronounced within the industry, that collegial relationship, whether that will still exist, it will for smaller distilleries. I don't know.
There is a danger there.
There is a danger that, particularly when competition and accountants start to get involved in the whiskey industry, you might lose that a bit. Maybe I don't know.
I'd like to think we can hang on to it, but I can see the writing on the wall, and
I think so.
It's something we should try and avoid and encourage not to happen. But
because when we do the Wednesday nights when we used to be able to do the Wednesday nights prior to the Whisky Fair, we'd have 6 or 7 different whiskies from, usually Tasmanian distilleries, and everybody was working together, and they're happy to donate the product and all sorts of things like that. That's how it should be. But whether it remains like that, I'm not too sure.
Raf has come up with the term Minister for Whiskey, which I quite like as well. We get a federal Minister for Whiskey, that'd be good. But just on that point, that like the things becoming too cluttered and, the competition feeding, that sort of thing, do you feel like that already exists a little bit between Tasmania and the mainland? And why do you hate us so much?
No, look, it's never been that, and I've always tried to encourage.
You're diseased.
That was deadpan as possible to see if I could slip that one through.
It's never been like that.
No.
We've always, where there's a region developing, say around Melbourne, and there's a group of Melbourne distillers to get together and to work as a group. The reason we do that down here is we get tremendous help from our government because we do that, because we call ourselves the Tasmanian whisky industry, and it works in our favour with government and all manner of assistance. That's the only reason. But I try as much as possible when I'm talking about whisky in general and talk about the Australian whiskies, and I try to put that aside, even though I'm fiercely proud of being part of the Tasmanian whisky industry. I'm also very proud of the Australian whisky industry, and like to promote that wherever I get the chance.
Yeah, 100%. There's quite a good point from Oliver Maruda in the chat here as well, that in these, one of the benefits perhaps of having to do everything virtually is you're going to the source a lot. You don't have representatives in various regions and various countries who you would call upon. You've got, we've had distillers staying up till 3 a.m. in America to talk to us, and you're going to the source. So that's quite interesting. I'm going to move on. Anyone who's got the tasting packs at home, they're 30 mils. Normally when we do this with Tim, we do 10 or 15 mils. So there's a bit of booze. I don't need to drink it all at once, but I'm going to have the next one. But I think I know the answer to this question from Regan on the Facebook, but I'm going to ask it as a bit of a segue. But Bill, do you miss distilling? And Tim, would you ever be interested?
Yeah, look, I do miss distilling. I do miss being at the coalface of the still. I don't miss getting up early in the morning and staying back late at night 7 days in a row. I don't miss that.
I see you've got a new coalface behind you there.
Yeah. But I'm actually loving my role in life. Look, most people, I think, realise I've sort of virtually retired. I'm semi-retired. My role at Lark is I've got nothing to do with the running of the company or anything else. I like to keep in touch with all the people there. And from time to time, they drag me out of a cupboard to stick my face on a screen or something, and I enjoy that role. I really enjoy it, and I'm really missing not being at the Oak Barrel. We had a lot of fun there last time, and I really miss that sort of interaction with the people that love whiskey, and I really do enjoy my role now. So, yep, look, but I've got a daughter and a son in the distilling industry. My daughter's got her own distillery. Our son Jack is running a distillery in Battery Point, and I get to sort of, if I feel a bit frustrated and I like to get behind the still, I try and muzzle in on theirs. I quickly get told to bugger off, and that's enough for me now. I enjoy all aspects of the industry, but really I enjoy getting out with people who just simply love to sit and have a whiskey.
And to answer the other part of the question, I'm inherently lazy. And there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work in distillation, and there's a lot of expense in distillation. I've probably taken the easy path and spent all my time and effort looking at maturation and the influence of good quality barrels on spirit and the matching of good quality spirit from to the barrel. And I enjoy the variation when I go and visit distilleries and they say, try this new make and see what sort of barrel we can match it to. I really enjoy that component of what we do. So would I want to be a distiller? No. I don't think so. Plus, I'm nearly as old as him, and you can tell by the colours. Look at these. So
I've still got more hair.
Yeah, most people have actually, Bill. But no, I don't think I'd want to be a distiller, and if I was, I'd want to be much, much younger. But I think too, we've got a lot of distilleries in development here, and to make them commercial, it's quite a cost. It's very, very expensive, and I think a few of them get to about year 3 and they're in a little bit of trouble because they've probably run out of cash, because you've got your grain bills and your electricity and your labour and things like that. And I think I've chosen the easier part.
Gee, you make it sound so romantic, Tim.
Yes.
For me,
sorry, I'm a little bit. Yeah.
For me, the getting back to the distilling is it's a real buzz when you can go through life and actually create something that people enjoy, and that's what a distiller achieves. They've handcrafted a whiskey. They've chosen the barrel to put it in. They've watched it age. They've chosen when to release it, and then they've shared it with somebody that loves it. Well, and that's a great thing about being a distiller. That sense of I've created this, and yeah, I like it, but isn't it wonderful that other people like it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said to, making something with your hands, that creation aspect, which is really important. But a g'day to Ben Baranow as well. He's in lockdown at the moment, ran Fantastic Whiskey and Dreams seminar a little while ago. A couple of people commenting in and prompted by Tim, your comments about your barrel bank and matching spirit to cask and that sort of thing. That sort of leaves us well into that concept that we sort of talked about before we came live about, sampling spirits and judging whiskies and that sort of thing. Because I think that's quite a unique art. And obviously, Bill, on a non-whiskey element, we had the Gin Awards judging a couple of weeks ago, which you couldn't get up for, but I drank your share, so don't worry, it was taken care of. But for me, it's been a big learning curve in the last couple of years. But how do you guys, and particularly yourself, Tim, when you're sampling things, how do you think about what that's going to match with and how that's going to work?
I don't think I've got the greatest palate, and it is usually dull after about 4 whiskies, in all seriousness, if you look at them really, really carefully. I mean, the things that Bill does on judging panels, I could not do. I find, and a lot of people think, when you're sampling all of these whiskies or judging whiskies, you've got the best job on the planet. It's actually particularly hard. If you go through 30 cask strength whiskies and you sit down and you assess those whiskies and you try and determine how you have to treat them, because recently I just went through 38 of our TIB barrels. We've got 90 barrels that can be called whiskey. 30 of them were of the oldest, around the 5 years of age. Of those 30, I think it was 38, I think I found 5 whiskies that were good, 3 that were absolutely horrible, and the others haven't made up their mind yet. But it is extremely difficult to assess all of those whiskies. And I don't know how somebody like Chris Thompson at Lark, who's continually tasting day after day. My palate gets really, really tired. I did a little bit of work on the due diligence of Nant, and I went to Flurio, and my palate was shot for 3.5 months. And maybe that's because I try to drink everything, but I'd actually defer to Bill to talk about on being a head judge on a tasting panel. How do you do it? How do you control, and how do you make sure you've got the whiskey you taste at the beginning of the day is assessed at the same standard as the whiskey at the end of the day?
Well, I think there's 2 things, Tim, and and Scotty's been through this process, when you're judging whiskies or you're doing a tasting of a lineup of a similar product, gin or whatever, is to try and turn off from being a consumer where you're wanting to describe it as having the nose of a leather lounge chair and the taste of pot pourri over a dirty old shoe or something. Get away from that. You're not trying to write the tasting notes to go on the back of a label. What you're looking at is it a good spirit, first and foremost? And you look at it, has it got the nose of what you would expect it to? So it's a matter of looking at it as if you were deciding whether to release it or not, to bottle it, and what strength to bottle it at. Is it a whiskey that holds up well on the palate? Is it a whiskey that has a good finish? So I try to explain to judges, I don't want to know what you think the whiskey tastes like. Has it got roses in it, or is it, it's the structure of the whiskey. So then to survive a big tasting, and the first whiskey judging I did was in Adelaide many years ago, and I judged 30 whiskies in a day. And the way to survive that is to, after every little sip, and you don't need to have a lot, but you do need to take a sip and swallow and let it finish, because that's an important,
very important
part of a whiskey tasting. But is between each one, nose a glass of water, and that clears your nasal passage, and then drink a glass of water. And so you're running off to the loo every 5 minutes. But it's amazing how many whiskies in a day you can get through and maintain a fresh palate. You've got to look after your palate.
Yes.
So there's those two things: turning off from being a consumer to trying to break it down in terms of its how it's made and how it drinks, and then surviving by looking after yourself.
I mean, I go, believe it or not, I go for extended periods where I don't sample whiskey. Even Dan Woolley has done that, believe it or not. If Dan's following us, he's gone for extended periods, even when he was brand ambassador for Lefroy, not sampling whiskey, because and you come back with a fresher palate and a clean palate, and I think it allows for you to be better in crafting a whiskey, but it's a survival mechanism as well. Yeah.
Well, it's true, because every August when Whisky Fair is, I don't drink whiskey during the month of August, as you both well know. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
No whiskey in August. But there's actually quite a real world. I mean, because not everyone's on a judging panel, and not everyone will sit and start at 9 a.m. and drink whiskey all day. But in a situation where this does happen, is Whisky Fair and whiskey shows and whiskey lives and all this sort of thing. So there are real world implications for this. And you do see it from my view, and all the best intentions to write tasting notes and, sniffing water. By the end, the whiskies that sell the most of and the most popular are the biggest, are the boldest, are the punchiest. And so I think that's quite an interesting point. Every fair, we always see it.
Look, and that's inevitable, Scotty, and I've seen it myself. And I used to fall victim to that too when I was judging, that you'd drink a lot of great whiskies and all of a sudden you'd get a big, bold one and you'd go, that's got to be the gold medal. But and a lot of us, as we go down the path of discovering whiskies, we inevitably also turn to big, heavy peated malts, big sherry bombs. We look for them and we want them and we love them all. But we've got to be careful. We don't forget that there are some sensational, stunning, delicate whiskies out there too, lighter whiskies.
Yeah.
And it's easy to overlook them.
I think also, though, too, probably as we work in the industry, and it's probably like we're looking for the bigger drug, and those that attract your attention are those that are the big sherry Glendronach cask strengths, or the massive Lefroys, or the good Lagavulins, those type of things that are, lots of peat and smoke. And Bill's right, you do look for that, but there are some subtle, beautiful whiskies, the old Rosebanks and things like that.
Absolutely.
And glorious
I mean,
whiskies.
what do you have for breakfast? You wouldn't have...
Cognac, Bill.
Cognac.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, one of my favourite distilleries is, Scottish distilleries, is Linkwood. Famously, light and grassy and elegant. But let's hold this thought for when we talk about the future, because I think that's something when it comes to cask treatments that will be in the future. But I want to say a quick g'day to a few people on the Facebook stream as well. Kathleen, who I don't know if you're at the start, but we said thank you for these excellent packs from Nipper Courage. Thank you for putting them together, and the whole team at Nipper Courage. Again, you can tell because they look professional, means it didn't come from the oak barrel, and particularly Scott's packing skills. But a g'day to Fiona and to Dave and Caroline Taylor in Launceston there calling in. But I'm going to segue this, a question from Regan here, from on the art of sampling something into the art, and I'm going to start pouring the TIB vatted malt in a second. So we're essentially moving from single casks or single samples into the art of blending things together. And the question comes in, have you ever found a bottle or a barrel or something that you couldn't fix, that you couldn't mold into something else?
I've been very lucky that we have been able to mould, if you like, most of our whiskies into something acceptable. And the first barrel I ever bought from Highland Holdings, it wasn't actually charred. And and through assistance from Bill and Lynn, we actually took a barrel after, I think it was 8 or 9 years of age, in a uncharred 300 litre barrel. And we were learning, we didn't know. and we put it into 3 heavily charred port barrels. I think it was around 8 or 9 years of age. And by the time they came out, they were about 17 years of age, and we were very fortunate. I couldn't answer that confidently. We've been lucky with the barrels that we've had, and we've been able to manipulate them to get good whiskies. But I'm only very small, and so there are probably barrels out there that you cannot recover, and probably some of the old, I don't want to mention any names, so some of the older releases, older age whiskies that with some of the distilleries around Australia, they've probably gone way too far, and they've taken on too much wood, and they're probably undrinkable, and you could not fix them. And what I find is if you have a flaw, it starts at the very beginning and goes right through to the very end within a whiskey, it's very, very hard to fix. But in all honesty, I haven't experienced enough barrels to say that I've come across some that we own that cannot be fixed. But Bill, you've seen, you work with more barrels than I do.
Yeah, look, Scotty and everybody else, we've been doing this for 27 years, and I've pulled a lot of barrels out of the bond store, and I can honestly say that I don't think there's ever been one barrel that I've said we just can't do anything with this. You wouldn't put it. We always check the barrels before we put it in, that they're fresh and sweet and everything else.
Yeah,
we're always, if we've never had a spirit run that we don't like, but we're pretty confident that the whiskey at the end of the day will be good. What it might not be is consistent with the particular style that we're producing at the time. If it's, say, like Lark Classic Cars, or if it doesn't sort of typify itself to be the Lark style of whiskey. So what we found that we can do, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with the whiskey, it's just not the right style. We might finish it off in a freshly dumped sherry butt that we can get a hold of from, say, Seppeltsfield, and we might leave it there for only 3 months, and that'll change the whiskey. It still might not be the same style as Lark, but or the whiskey we're looking for, we can then put it out as a special release. One of the reasons we developed our whiskey liqueur, Slonjo, is because those whiskies, whilst they were still good, they weren't the style we were looking for to release as let's say a Lark whiskey. That was perfect for then marrying with a botanical spirit to become our whiskey liqueur. So there's always a use for the whiskey.
I think too, though, with what Larks have produced for me and producing for themselves, you produce a good spirit, you put it into a good barrel, and you get a good whiskey. And Lynn's over in the background, and I love her, and I always quote Lynn, shit in, shit out. And so, if you've got good spirit and into a good barrel, you'll get a good whiskey. And I mean, me personally, I concentrate on buying a variety of good quality spirit from over 15 distilleries now, and 20 different new makes, and we put them into really good quality barrels, and hopefully we continue to get good quality whiskies out the other end. Larks are a little bit different in that they have a house style. They still produce special releases, but they generally have a house style, and they produce good spirit, and they have, they have relationships with numerous wineries, and they get really good barrels. You get really good whiskies. We just hope we don't get really, really bad whiskies. But I'm, there are some out there that do exist, but hopefully they're not in either of our portfolios,
Yeah. And we should give a big shout out to Lynn, who has actually done most of the hard work in the past 27 years. I know that. Bill takes a lot of the glory.
I got in so much trouble with my wife. I hope she's not listening, that I said Lynn was the engine and Bill was the hood ornament, and she gave it to me, so.
I'm the eye candy.
Yes, mate, I know.
But yes, g'day to Lynn. I hope you're doing well as well. But I mean, just on that concept then, when you are creating something from scratch, and I am drinking the vatted malt at the moment, and this is a small batch, but say, you are creating, the Lark Classic cask or whatever it is, or any single malt from scratch, how do you go through that process then, and what skills you use for blending to go, okay, I've got 10 barrels or 100 barrels or 1,000 barrels, and I don't know what the single malt's going to be. I don't know what the end result is because it doesn't exist yet. Like, how do you get your mind around that concept?
You've got to know there are two different scales, right? I don't know how many thousand litres that you have to work with now, or they have to work with at last.
I think Chris is working with anything upwards of 3,000 litres to put a batch together.
So, and I'm working with 150 to 200. So, you know, different scale. You know, I see them lock Chris away in his little tin room, and I watch, you know, the samples that he has around him, and I you know, it's something I couldn't do, I work on a much smaller scale, but then I've got probably more variety than Larks have in what we have in store, because we have now 16 barrel types, 20 different new makes, 7 different cooperages, and we just what we do that's probably different. We look at a whiskey, we look at what its flaw is, or what it's lacking, and then we'll go out into all the other barrels of whiskey that we have, and we look to patch that flaw. So a bit like spack filler. And the first ever blend, we came up with the name The Beagle, and Bill, I hope your memory's good, but Bill probably gave me that name. And we named it after Charles Darwin's voyage of discovery and the evolution of whiskey. And we're up to the Beagle number 7. And there's a photo that I have of the first ever Beagle being made, and it's just a blue plastic tub, like 3 witches round witches coven around a cauldron, and Chris Thompson, Bill Lark, and Tim Duckett are there going, well, let's chuck this in and see what that does, and let's go. Yeah, we go, oh, okay, you know, what's it lacking? Well, we've got something there that can improve that, and now we've got more or less a pretty rough formula that we use for making our blends, whether they are TIB or Heartwood, and it's using all of the resources that we have in the bomb store. Now, what about Lark? How do they approach their blending and stuff like that?
Yeah, much the same way, except when we're looking to develop, say, the classic cask. I know we hold up, if people remember, LD 100, it was kind of, I guess, the first whiskey we won a big award for in the World Whiskey Awards. And that was when we really felt we made it, I guess. And luckily, we still have a number of those bottles. And every so often, the distilling team and Chris Thompson, the head blender, he refreshes his palate against that whiskey and aims desperately to put something out that will be close to it. We don't want to be exactly the same. We don't set out to do that, but we'd like it to be identifiable as a whiskey. And the great thing about that whiskey was always to show people all of the elements that go into making the whiskey. So you want the nose to display the fruity floral notes of the barley. You want the type of cask to shine on the front of the palate. You want the rich oily malt in the middle, and then a hint of peat on the finish. So that's Chris's job, is to identify those whiskies, to put them together to have that style of whiskey.
Yeah, and I think,
masterclass, Scotty, by the way.
Sorry?
That was a masterclass.
Yeah, sorry. So I just shut up and, listen for 5 minutes then. But, the Beagle was a very, very good whiskey. Certainly better than the Four Corners of Ross.
You didn't like the Four Corners of Ross?
I don't think anyone did.
Yeah, it's a funny name, though. It's good. It won awards in UK. It's just you didn't like it.
Didn't he?
No.
No. He did the Four Corners of Ross.
Yeah.
Lark did the Four Corners of Ross.
Yeah, I'll see you.
Yeah. Just because I'm on the vatted malt, is there a touch of peated? The question's coming. Is there a touch of peated whiskey in the vatted malt number 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it was 900 mils in 200 something litres of Adams peated malt spirit. Yeah, it's that's where we added. It was only 2 years of age, but we're finding. Actually, I sat down with Lynn to do barrel 775, LD 775, and we cut that quite late, and it was very heavily peated. But now, after 9 years, the influence of the smoke and the peat is gone. I think if we're going to produce peated whiskies in Tasmania, and we want a lot of smoke and peat influence, I think they're going to have to be quite young. Even in Scotland, in Islay, with time, the influence of peat and smoke diminishes, it just seems to, in my bond store in particular, disappear really, really quickly. Yeah.
I don't agree with you entirely. I think the peat's still there, even though it's
Oh,
not.
yeah, sorry, it's expressed.
It adds a sweetness and a depth. To
yeah, and a length. Sorry, I use the peat for length. Yeah, but that actual build of smokiness and peatiness.
I just like to disagree with you, Tim.
Yeah, I know, but he's right. What it does do is, and I agree with you, Bill, it adds sweetness and length, and that's why I use a lot of peated spirit in the blends that we make, because it gives me an extra dimension in the middle palate, and it gives me length. And the other thing is too, with all our second fill barrels that we have, I've talked about the re-education process and the recipe, but I only put peated new make into those barrels to give me an extra dimension in the middle palate.
Sure.
So you agree?
Yeah,
That's all right.
I'm just at the risk of going down a rabbit hole, which is probably going to happen anyway. Yeah. A lot of the mainland distilleries who are making very heavily peated whiskies and finding ways to carry that peat through 2, 3, 4 years of maturation is using Scottish peated malt. Now, obviously, Lark has the peat bog in the sort of highlands of Tasmania there. Do you see, Tasmanian peat creating a smoke bomb, sort of big smoky whiskey as opposed to peaty in the future? Or
look, it is possible, although it'll never be the big smoke bombs of Lloyds and Ardbegs, but it'll be very noticeable in some future releases. So when I started doing it, I used to only peat smoke 16% of the malt. I then started smoking about 20% of the malt, and probably 8-10 years ago, we started peat smoking 50% of the malt. But as Tim's explained, and as people know, by the time you go through the brewing process and then maturation, you do tend to lose a lot of that peat flavour coming through as a dominant note. But we have been doing some runs where we've been heavily peat smoking 100% of the malt and leaving it in the post-malt peat smoker for a lot longer. So I'm fairly confident, and I've had a bit of a sneak taste of a few barrels in the bond store, and I think Tim has too. There are going to be some, not big peat bombs, but noticeably peaty whiskies.
So you've also got to realise too, we've got 28 years of history in the whiskey industry. Scotland and Ireland have been working on it for 400 years, you see. And we've still got a lot to learn about our peats. By definition, peat is 30% organic matter, and it's usually laid down under anaerobic conditions and is partially decomposed. And so therefore it's a fuel, if you like, once it's dry. And we have the sphagnum peat bogs up in the centre of Tasmania at Lake Echo or Browns Marsh, where the Lark, smallest mining lease in Australia, is. And we've got Peter Bignell using peat, a bog peat from his brother's farm up in the northeast of Tasmania. And there are these organic soils throughout the highlands of Victoria and New South Wales. And we've got, I used to work, as you can tell, I used to work as a soil scientist on the west coast, and you had different peats in rainforest as you did in bogs, and all of these would impart different characteristics as they do in Scotland. You have the highland peats, which give you heather. You have the Isla peats, which gives you iodine and salt and all those sorts of things. We've just got a lot. We've got peat in abundance, but we've also got a lot to learn. So there's more experimentation that needs to be done here for us to, and I think we can do it. There's just more work to be done.
Yeah, and Peter Bignell actually reminds me of quite a talking point from last year's Whisky Fair was the Bogan burnout, which was one of his experiments. Was a love or hate situation. I think I've got love and hate there, but that was a white spirit, so it hadn't had too much or zero oak effect. So that was quite interesting. But yes, Pete understood there was definitely smoke on that one. There was no denying.
You remember that? Yeah, you think? Yeah, really?
I'm still tasting it a year on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to pour myself a little bit of Don't Fuck It Up, Son. I think that's the correct way to pronounce it, which is a new hard one. I'm just going to take that as a bit of a go as we move on to a couple of questions are coming through. And good day to Michael as well, who's switched from New South Wales whiskey to Tasmanian whiskey while he's been watching. I used to pride myself, particularly when I started in this role about 6 years ago, on being across everything, knowing who had whiskey on the market, who was coming through, when new people were starting up, when people were thinking about starting up. And now, particularly in the last 6 months, I've turned around and not only new distilleries from Tasmania, but new distilleries have aged whiskey on the market. So, I mean, there's this huge, influx of distilleries all over Australia, but certainly, while we look at Tasmania, that's very true. Like for me personally, and I'm sure if I'm feeling it, then a lot of other people from the mainland are feeling it as well, is what should we be looking for when we're presented with, for the first time ever, a selection of 10, sometimes, 20, 30 Tasmanian whiskies. From a drinker's point of view, what sort of insight can you give us? Like what sort of things should we be looking for? And because, they're not always cheap. Whiskey's not a cheap thing. I can't afford to go out and buy all 30 and try them myself.
Jim, you go, mate. That's a tough one.
Yeah, who wants to catch that one?
Question. See, the problem is you were saying as a consumer, what would you look for? The problem
as a drinker.
As a drinker, yeah, no, we're drinkers. You can tell we've got to get the toss pots back together again.
Yeah,
soon, we've got to do that. The difficulty is there are whiskies, and I think as I've got older, my range is probably narrowed. Where my son Louis still looks at volume, I look at quality. Is he listening?
He was around before.
He's tired, Louis. The thing is, though, I make whiskey I like, okay, and that might not necessarily be to everybody's taste, and this is why it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
It is.
You just have to try them all.
Yeah, you have to try as many as you can. But I don't know. See, age plays a part in the type of whiskey somebody likes. Quite often, younger people like slightly sweeter whiskies. I didn't like a sherry whiskey until I was 30. And so therefore, I don't think I can answer the question and give you the answer that you want, because I think it's based on age, female, because I think females have a far better palate and nose than men do. And I've actually had that explained to me by a doctor why that's the case. I don't want to go into it here. I mean, if I was to say to you what I look for texture more than anything. We've often talked about the dinosaur. I like my whiskies to build and build and build and have a big middle and a long tail. And, but then some of the best whiskies I've had in the world actually don't fit that profile.
I tell you what I look for, Scotty. I look forward to coming to the Oak Barrel next year when I can try all these new whiskies. That's the way to do it, is to go to a big whiskey tasting like the Oak Barrel Whisky Fair, and they'll be there and you can line up and have a tiny sip. You can come back for a second sip.
And look for what's under the table as well. Yeah, you got to do that. Yeah.
Well, the Oak Barrel Whisky Fair has famously tried to eradicate that. Don't put under the table, don't. So it's for everyone. It's not just for people who know to ask. It should be on the top of the table at any point. I know you like to put stuff under the table, but we try and encourage everything on. Don't want to be one of those fairs. But I mean, that's interesting. I mean, one of the things as well is, and you touched upon it with the peak conversation, there's 20, 30 years of knowledge and experience, and whiskey is not a quick thing to make. One of the things that I've really loved watching, and I don't see this anywhere else in Australia up until potentially recently, was the Lark Cellar Door being a breeding ground for people getting into the whiskey industry. Like the amount of people that got a job, cleaning up glasses at this Lark Cellar Door, then worked behind the bar, then worked running tours at the distillery and ended up in some role at the distillery. There's no real pathways, no natural pathways for that anyway. Like you maybe look at an Archie Rose or a Brix or, maybe some other Starwood who are doing that now as well. From your point of view, these new distilleries coming through, but particularly as questions about the young generation of people, because there's no generational, apart from your children really, Bill, there's no generational thing yet, and that will come. But what's been impressing and exciting you about this new wave of distillers that, there's so many we can't keep track of at the moment?
What amazes me is the passion amongst these young people to want to produce a whiskey that we all like to drink. They're just as keen as we were and still are. So that's encouraging. What I think we need in this industry is now a way of educating young people in the distillery to give them the confidence that they too can produce, world-class whiskies. But there's there's many ways of working in the industry, and I guess the young people are lucky really because I think in Tasmania there are over 50 distilleries. So, and I think we're all willing to allow people to move around in the industry. They might start off, washing bottles or filling bottles for one distillery, but move on to another one. We've seen that here in Tasmania in the last few years. People are freely moving around the industry to get the experience in all of those different areas. And some end up in, sales and marketing. And you see people like Bertie Kaysen that worked at Sullivan's Cove, and look what he's done with his whiskey club. And I think
biggest whiskey club in the world.
We've got to a size and a scale across Australia now where people are able to sort of move about and learn all those different aspects of the industry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and to create those sort of jobs, will have to come naturally a little bit. But you sort of touched on it. Then, where do you think the industry is headed? Like, where do you see Tasmanian whiskey in 10 years, 20 years time? Yeah,
look, I think that's a good question. I get asked that all the time. When will we have too many distilleries in Tasmania? That's a question asked a lot. I think in terms of volume, even the big distilleries, Hellier's Road, Lark, Sullivan's Cove, some of the other bigger ones, even with the amount they're producing, it's still only a tiny little drop in the world market, and even now the Australian market. And so if we had 100 distilleries producing whiskey, I don't think we'll ever produce too much. The worry for me is that we might start to lose that thinking that we're something very special. Like if there's a distillery on every corner, it's not quite so special. I don't know how you can stop that. I don't think we can. I think that'll just sort of self-regulate. So I think it's fair to say that Tim and I have come through probably the golden age, the heyday of where we were small enough that we could all help each other and work with each other, and we didn't have to fight for shelf space. That's definitely going to change. It's inevitable that some of these distilleries want to get big enough to compete in the world marketplace, so inevitably they'll have a lot more whiskey out there. And it's a matter then for a small distillery to find its niche, create something that's special, find the place that they can be where they can sell to a market they want to sell to. I tell you what, if I had my time again and I was starting out now, I'd build a tiny little distillery in a really great location where there was a community of people that enjoyed whiskey that would come to my cellar door and drink my whiskey and sell it that way. And I wouldn't get involved in the bigger world market. And I think there is plenty of potential for that still. So I think we'll see distilleries grow. They'll want to take on the world. They'll want to, the demand is out there for Australian whiskies. And look at Archie Rose, the wonderful job they're doing. Cameron Symes in Western Australia. There are distilleries that are going to be of a significant size, probably still very small on the world scale. But there is still room for the small distiller. I just worry about the fact that there might be too many.
I'm probably a little more pessimistic than Bill.
Really?
Yeah, I am. Because I think I went and asked some questions the other day about how many distilleries there were in Tasmania, and it's over 60. There's 7 proposed for the Hobart area. I mean, the market, one, we don't have any tourists like you, Scotty, coming down to visit us. I do think that there'll be some copper for sale soon, because some of them won't survive. There are, the market at the moment, particularly without tourists, is very, very tight, I think. And there's a lot of new distilleries that are going to be releasing around the same time that are competing in the same market. And I think that's going to be a little bit tough, leading on from some of the things that Bill said.
We have to throw COVID into the mix. It has changed the market. There's no question. And none of us know how it's changed. Yep. We won't know that for many years.
I think Larks and Heartwood and TIB, we've been around a while. And so fortunately we've got a name and we've got a brand that is recognised, particularly Larks. And that does us in good stead in these tough times. But if you are developing a whiskey market and you're competing with a lot of other people doing the same thing without a brand name, I think it's going to be difficult for some, and I think a few might not make it.
No, unless you pick that nice little niche where you just satisfy a local market.
Because the thing is, though, we've got 500,000 people in Tasmania. Yeah, close enough. Where in, let's say, New South Wales, distilleries are spread, hundreds of kilometres apart, and they can support the local market. Here, just Tasmanians at the moment, with 60, as I said, probably 63 distilleries in the next 12 months. I think it's going to be interesting times, and I think it's going to be tough for some of the people, some of the new distilleries.
Yeah. I actually, one thing I was going to mention earlier that I forgot that I want to mention now. Just before we started the stream, I saw that Serge Valentin from whiskyfun.com, which is my sort of source of truth for a lot of whiskey reviews. He posted about 10 whiskey reviews from around the world today, and gave, I think either the top or the second top was Hellier's Road 15-year-old, which he gave a big 90 points, which I have to admit is a distillery or a whiskey, the 15-year-old, that I haven't tried in a long time because I've got the world's greatest job and I get to try new things all the time. But that's a whiskey I need to go back and try, because that's world-class level 90 points by Serge. So well done to them. But it is very interesting, and that sort of competition, because it wasn't long ago, 5 years ago, when I would have 4 or 5 Australian whiskies on the shelf for Christmas, including maybe 1 Limeburners and 1 Starward, if I could get them. And now I'm in the process of, things have to be on rotation, or I've got to say, okay, you can have 6 months on, 6 months off, because you can't stock everything. And so I think that's becoming a real challenge. Like, are you seeing that, Destination Cellars, a great bottle store down in Hobart there, they might be the only ones that could potentially stock every 63 distilleries. But
they don't.
But then again, that's not necessarily good business too.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, talking to some outlets and bars in Victoria and New South Wales, they are actually tasting and vetting whiskey from new distilleries now before they will stock it on their shelves. And if it doesn't make the grade, it's not stocked. And you'll find that in, if you talk about that example of Destination Cellars, their gin, the demand for space on their shelves, they can't fit all the gin in. They just physically can't do it, because there's so much out there. Anyway, as I was saying, there's just the volume of gin, and I think the volume of whiskey that will be generated. Yeah, physical space is an important thing, and I think a lot of people are looking at the quality. The other thing that some retailers are looking at is that a new distillery produces its best whiskey as its first release. And they quite often, being Australian or Tasmanian, they're quite high priced. And then, unfortunately, they drop away because they can't back it up. They need cash flow. They're probably producing quite young whiskey. So, as I say, they choose their best whiskey first, and then they still charge the same price for their 3rd, 4th, 5th release. And I know of some retailers that are actually looking at the latter releases to see if they're at the same standard as the first release before they'll buy.
That's a really interesting point, what you said there, that some bars and retailers are looking at the whiskies before they choose to stock them.
Yep. Every
other product in that store, that would be the general rule. It's madness to stock something that you haven't tried, but I think that it's an interesting thing that has been the norm, because you haven't been able to get any Tasmanian whiskey in the past 5 years. But sort of that utopia is over. So I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up, that people are shocked now that people want to try their booze before they stock them.
Yep.
But yeah, there's sort of an element of, as well, distilleries, your first release is great, but also distilleries moving into the future, you should be refining your spirit and your wood management and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to keep you boys, because I know there's big partying to go in there in front of the fire. But in terms of with 63 distilleries, the world of sourcing wood has changed. I'm a big fan of bourbon cask whiskey, and the last time I was down at Lark, going through those warehouses, those bourbon casks for me were the pick of the bunch. Is that what you're seeing? It's like if we're drinking, sitting around in 5 years' time doing the exact same thing, we're talking about all these new bourbon cask releases, or is it wine cask, still being very heavily used down there? I know you love wine cask, Tim.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Love it. Yeah.
Look, I think wine cask was seen as the solution to the problem of we're not going to be able to get fortified wine barrels soon. That hasn't happened yet, quite amazingly. We still are able to get fortified casks, which is good. I was always reluctant to put whiskey in a bourbon cask because I guess when I started, and without, I love my Scottish malts. I only got into this because I love the Scottish malts. But back then, there was a time when a lot of whiskies in Scotland were probably matured in third fill bourbon casks. And the whiskey was sensational, but it lacked that depth. And so I was always reluctant to put our whiskey in a bourbon cask until we were able to get some really good casks from Heaven Hill one year. We shared with Pat Maguire. We put the whiskey in, and when it came time to look at them, I was stunned just how good a Tasmanian whiskey, and this goes across Australia, how good Australian whiskies are matured in fresh, emptied bourbon casks. They're sensational. And luckily, it's still possible to get a hold of bourbon casks.
For how long?
Yeah, I don't know for how long.
Because they're talking about, instead of just using a bourbon cask once, they're talking about using them twice. So
yeah, we'll see. Then we're going to fall into that trap of having second, third fill. The whiskey will still be good, but it'll start to lack that depth. But at the moment, we're really lucky. We've got some great whiskies coming up in a lot of Australian distilleries, matured in, first filled and second filled bourbon casks.
4 or 5 years ago, it was Bill that pointed out that probably one of the limiting factors to the whiskey industry will be the supply of. You remember that?
I do. I was worried.
Yeah, worried that the supply of fortifieds. There seems to be at the moment an abundance of fortifieds. How long that lasts, I don't know. I've been buying some very old stock. I've got 50-year-old Australian port barrels. Can't call it port anymore. Anyway, we'll call it port.
That's another argument.
Yeah, it's another argument for another day. And I just got some sherry barrels and some Tokay and some muscat, all above 50 years of age. I think one of the things that is making them available, I feel that there are a lot of distilleries out there that have quietened down a little bit their spending. And I think
they're refilling barrels.
Yeah, and so I've found the fortifieds in the last 6 months much easier to get than I did in the previous 3 years. Now I don't know, I might be overthinking it, but and still, a good quality port barrel is going to be $600-800, and I bought some old sherry barrels, and they're about $1,300 if you get them recoopered, And some of that's an expense that a lot of small distilleries are going to struggle to meet.
Yeah, we're in the swings and roundabouts, and the Scottish industry's been going through that for years. And 20 years ago, there was some sensational aged whiskies coming out of Scotland. Then all of a sudden they dried up. Look at Ardbeg 10. It's 10, but it's not the Ardbeg 10 that it used to be. It used to have 14-year-old and 18-year-old whiskey in it. But I think we're coming back into an era where soon they will have aged whiskies again. And for us, it'll be, that style of maturation, being able to get a hold of some port and sherry casks again. And I think the Australian whiskey industry's copped a little bit of criticism lately for a couple of people that our whiskies are overcooked in terms of its fortified characters in some of our barrels, that we're using really active casks, and that's influenced the whiskey. Well, for a while, that was what gave Australian whiskies its edge in the market. Now we're starting to see second fill barrels that are producing sensational whiskies. We're coming into another period. So a lot to look forward to. And it'll swing around and come back. And
I'm heading off tomorrow to actually look at a whole range of Australian port barrels, 20 years plus. So, so that's and like I say, I struggled to get them maybe 18 months, 2 years ago. Really struggled to get really good quality barrels, and yep, they're around. So swings and roundabouts.
I think what's happened is the wineries that had those fortifieds didn't realise 20 years ago that we wanted them.
Yeah,
and now all of a sudden they've woken up to the fact that we want them, and they're sitting on something valuable. We've been approached by a winery in Victoria that was thinking of refilling them with fortified, but they've gone, no, we'll sell them to the distilleries.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting point. Like, tastes are always going to change and fluctuate, and you can't rely or make a whiskey to a taste profile. It'll eventually come back to you. And swings and roundabouts. I think that's a really good point. What you were talking about, Bill. You can, if you want to go and be in the every airport bar in the world, you need X amount of funds to do that. But if you stay in your lane and make small amounts and sell what you can, then that should keep you in a good stead to deal with those. And this year's been a hell of a roundabout or a swing, whichever way you want to do it. And I think
snakes and ladders, mate.
Yeah, I think Dan Woolley asked quite a good question. The destination might be a little bit different, but it is the question that I think everyone's asking everyone is, g'day boys, when are we going back to Isla?
Yeah, as soon as we can, Dan. I want to revisit that Bond store. Yeah.
And is there any truth in the rumour that Tim, while you've been messing around in the Bond store by yourself, unsupervised, that the spanking bat has come out a little bit more than usual?
Yes, mate. I twirl it to music now. There's nobody there to laugh at me, so it's fine.
Yeah. Well, look, guys, I've kept you a little bit longer than I promised I'd let you go. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, it was good, Tim, to keep the record going. The Wednesday before fair, usually to have you on there, and Bill, always a pleasure to chat whiskey. If we were going to rush out and buy a Tasmanian whiskey tomorrow, what would be your favourite thing you're sipping on at the moment?
Me?
Or both of you?
Gosh, when everybody asks me that, I've usually got about half a dozen that I'm sipping on at the moment that I really love. I tell you, there's some cracker whiskies coming up. I know Kempton, for instance, is about to have its second Solero cask release, and wow, if you thought the first one was good, I had a sneak taste of that the other day. It's a stunning whiskey. Just keep an eye out for that. Oh gosh, there's so many. Well, and Christy, my daughter, she's just about got her distillery up and running again, but she's been sitting on some barrels in the meantime that have really come of age, and she's about to come out probably in the next month or so with some sensational whiskies, and her whiskey's always fantastic. So there's a lot to look forward to. Lark's released a couple of really good special releases lately, and they're going to be, I'm told by Chris, having probably another 3 or 4 special limited releases before the end of the year. And they're usually barrels that just identify themselves as standing out from the crowd. And, what do you got, Tim?
No, I'm over that bloody TIB and Heartwood rubbish, mate. I've got a bloody Bond store full of the bloody stuff. And I just, the worst thing that can happen to me, I go and visit somebody and they offer me one of my own whiskies. Really, seriously,
Yeah.
So
it's even worse when it's the Four Corners of Ross.
Boy and Glendronach and everything else.
Yeah. Look, guys, thank you so much. We look forward to coming down and being tourists again and harassing you around various bars and fireplaces down in Tasmania. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. We will be back tomorrow night with our virtual distillers dinner, where I think we're going to take a few of these threads that have come up tonight and sort of apply them to various case studies, distilleries that have, like Backwoods that have launched their first whiskey, Sullivan's who are now seeing their, refills come to fruition after 14 years in their second go round. A lot of different stories to talk about from an Australian whiskey point of view. So that's going to be fascinating as well.
Well, thanks, Scotty. And look forward to the 8th barrel next August.
And our thoughts are with everybody in New South Wales and Victoria. So take it easy, guys. There was a German virologist, and he said that alcohol and whiskey, strong whiskey particularly, kills COVID. He said the only problem is you've got to have one every 15 minutes.
Well, you'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll be right.
Yeah.
No worries.
And look, the New South Welshmen, we're doing all right. It's the Victorians that really need your thoughts at the moment. And in particular, any Collingwood and St Kilda fans as well. They're doing it really tough. So
Collingwood, come on.
They're in the top 8. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, but you have to wake up and realise that you're a Collingwood supporter. So, all right, we're gonna just stay in the Zoom for 2 seconds. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone on the Facebook. A lot of good comments coming in saying thanks for the night. So, thanks, boys, and thank you everyone on the Facebook and YouTube chats there.
Great.